This episode is sponsored by Appian, a technology leader in driving digital-first insurance transformation. With Appian's low-code automation platform, you can build enterprise apps and workflows rapidly in an agile environment. How long have you been flying?
So I started flying actually while I was in high school. It was just, no one in my family was a pilot. It was just a passion that I had and kind of one of those crazy things you do when you're a teenager, and kept doing it. Did it for quite a few years, and I originally thought that was going to be my career path.
And what happened?
I married a helicopter pilot, and like I think a lot of people know, marriage can derail a lot of things in life and change your plans. So it was a good thing, though. It ended up where it is today, and I think it's the right path. So it's all right.
Well, are you a helicopter pilot, fixed wings? How many licenses do you have?
Yeah, so I'm a helicopter pilot. I chose helicopters. I was always amazed by just the difficulty behind flying them. My husband's a professional helicopter pilot, flies for UCLA Children's. That's enough. That's where it ends.
So, as a Angelino, what happened with Brian? Seriously, what happened there?
What happened with what?
With the helicopter crash?
That I can't really touch for the reason of, and I think a lot of professional people would say, if you weren't right there in that space at that time, it's hard to make assumptions, especially with something as serious as that. And as an amateur pilot at best, I just wouldn't want to put myself in that pilot's shoes at that time.
Such an eloquent response. I truly appreciate it. Although everyone really wants to understand how we lost such a treasure of the city.
It's horrific. I had met that pilot early on just because it's such a small community. And, and obviously with Kobe, it's such a loss to the city, but it's just one of those horrific events that occurs. And it's hard to understand what happens in that moment.
Can you give us a little bit of introduction about yourself, who you are, beside the fact that you're a helicopter pilot?
So basically, I started out my career at the beginning of e-com, actually in Los Angeles. There's a company here called Cars Direct, and just got to get involved in the early process of when selling cars online was something new and interesting. And got contacted by a headhunter kind of out of nowhere from a company that later became Solera and Auto Physical Damage. And, just being young and naive, the idea of going from automotive, sales into automotive over in insurance seems like an easy and obvious transition, when in reality, I could have just gone into pharmaceuticals or something, because it's completely starting from scratch. And after that, just ended up, being at Mitchell International for 10 years and finding auto physical damage just something to be incredibly interesting, especially during this transition of auto tech coming into the space. And went from, meeting a lot of mentors in the space that were really focused on, at the time, what was called, basically fixing computers on wheels, of how are we going to take all these technicians that are used to using hammers and fixing vehicles and making sure that people stay safe and aren't dying in secondary collisions because calibrations aren't done correctly. And these same individuals now have to basically be able to code and do programming to some level, and became incredibly passionate around that area. Got to spend a lot of time with the shops actually doing these repairs, and through one connection or another, that's what life is about, is all this networking. Got introduced to a seed stage startup in Los Angeles that was really focused on creating early stage AI around fixing vehicles. And probably, I would say like my husband wasn't super excited about the decision to leave the cushy, comfortable big company environment, made the leap and left, a 10 plus year career in that space to join a startup, early seed stage, as a CRO. Pretty quickly became the CEO and built up a team over there. And, basically, I think created a lot of change and got a lot of attention on trying to address these things, as well as bridging communication gaps in between the three main software solutions out there. And I think that was, I think a lot of people would say in startups, the education you get in 1 year at a startup is equal to 10 years at a normal company, just through the blunt force of being on the front and, being that what I would describe at times as like a fishing ship out in the middle of the ocean and just getting knocked around so much. And it was just a wonderful experience. And like so many startups, things change over time, and the direction really started to focus on the primary offering of the company and not so much the AI that I was passionate about. So we ended up parting ways. And again, just an interesting connection in LA. Knew a great influencer in this space, Julie Ehrman, who is running Angel City Football Club now, introduced me to her neighbor when she found out I was in the space I was, who was running this really interesting startup called HONK. And that kind of brings me to present tense. And they were doing some interesting things in roadside. So I started talking to them, and just, I think the complementary talent on both sides and the backgrounds together was something we were both really excited about, brought me to HONK. Since then, like you said, I'm the CRO here. I did some things on the network side as well, but we're really just building a platform that's reaching deeper and deeper into the insurance space, and like everybody trying to make a long-lasting difference on, the future, where that's headed.
I love the fact that you already started, the segue to HONK. Now you've been with HONK for a little bit over 2 years, right? A
little bit over 2 years. That's right. It'll be 3 years in the fall.
Congratulations. Now, yeah, and I see already the things that you brought up from the previous startup in terms of AI, and I'll be more than happy to dig into that, because AI, it's like, their ears are still perked. Apparently, it's still a hot topic. I don't know why, because we've been talking about AI, telematics, all that stuff for so many years. But yeah, it's still a work in progress here, right?
Some of this is the silver lining of COVID. I really think that, there's so many horrible things that have happened, but this is one of those silver linings that really push that tech to a point where it's no longer, out in the future. It's real, it's today, it's happening, and it's incredibly exciting.
Tell us a little bit about HONK so we can have the context, and we'll continue from there.
Absolutely. So HONK came into the industry really looking to disrupt roadside, because like a lot of founder stories, our founder had an awful experience of waiting forever on the side of the road and watching a million tow trucks go by, and just couldn't understand why one of them couldn't stop to help. So no one from the executive team comes from the roadside industry. It's all a bunch of technologists. Went back, and the simplest description is created an Uber, Lyft-like operation to deal with roadside. And the way what I mean with that is, basically bring 70,000 providers. So go out there and get all the providers in this industry connected to a platform, put the consumer at the center. So when somebody needs help, rather than the old school model of roadside, which is you own a territory. So Joe's Towing owns a 5-mile radius, and no matter who calls in for help, they all get stacked up with Joe, which is why we all wait 60, 90 minutes on the side of the road. HONK put the consumer at the middle and went out in a radius and looked for who's the closest person that we can trust, that has the right equipment and treats customers the right way, is safe, and connects those two individuals together. And by doing that, the company over the last 8 years or so has completely changed expectations and created a retention tool really for insurance carriers, fleet companies, other businesses, because we're giving great experiences, we're doing it faster, and we put incentives for our providers in the right place to cause our NPS to be as high as it is. And that builds on the background, which we're going to talk about later, Now that that's been developed, we're really looking at ways of how we can use the tech in trucks to have a further influence on developing areas around us, like tech in insurance and other businesses that coming out of COVID are flourishing now.
Now, I would really like to continue to talk about insurance because that's a natural question, but I'm very curious about the business of the roadside assistance. So you talked about territory. So you had Joe's truck or whatever that may be. How did it work? Who set up this is your territory, where they're like walking like gangs and, marking with graffiti, or how did it work?
Great question. I wish that was the story because that would be an awesome story to tell. But this is where I'm going to get into the dangerous territory of assumptions because I haven't actually found any true history of roadside. But just looking around at where we are now, the large companies in this space created agreements and basically exchanged territory for standardized SLAs and pricing. So I think that model, very similar to a lot of things in insurance, like DRPs and other places that just kind of evolved over time of how do we handle a very segmented business and create some standard around it, evolved into this system that was really counterintuitive to, I think, what it was designed to do in the beginning, which is give, people at best a wonderful experience, but at least the dignity of knowing what's going to happen and experiencing that in a safe way.
So the analogy or the example will be taxi dispatching networks that they had different regions or territories, and now you decentralize it. Oh, here is the crypto reference of the day, and you made sure that, well, at the end of the day, the application of it's customer centric because it's all about where the customer and who's the first to serve that customer. Okay, great. My curiosity is satisfied. Now let's talk about insurance because the majority of our audience are insurance, insurtech, investors, this beautiful part of the ecosystem. My introduction to HONK was when I was with Farmers Insurance, part of the team of looking into HONK, see how we can actually integrate their value proposition into the digital products, mobile application, web. Of course, web doesn't really make sense when you are stuck on the road, but it was more about mobile. And then, of course, the value proposition, which is for many people, claim the right service to your policyholder. And always we look at the NPS score because that's the easiest way to measure a success of the company and not the agents.
Down to retention, honestly, in the long run is...
Yes, retention, most definitely.
It's interesting because it's not talked about a lot, but roadside is the most common claim by far, right? These instances, collisions, at least, current data or whatever, only happen every 7 to 10 years. So those touch points with customers are so important. And if you think about, the memory that most people think about when they have a roadside claim, it's awful. So if you can turn that around and you're representing an insurance company, like you mentioned, Farmers, and you show up and it's just this night and day great experience, we can see directly in the data how that positively impacts for that cohort of people, the retention of a major insurance company. And that's obviously incredibly exciting. And you're not anymore thinking about changing tires. You're thinking about how you can retain claimants in this incredibly competitive space we live in right now. So I think it's really exciting, when you get out of the headspace of just looking at this as, again, a roadside assistance claim.
Mm-hmm. Do you do anything else in the claim space, or is it more about the retention or showing a little bit of love to the policyholder at first notice of loss?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really interesting thing. Like you mentioned before, when you start to tie in just my background and how startups grow and things start to evolve. And with COVID happening, a lot of the acceleration around the adoption of AI technology in the claim space is incredibly interesting to us. So We've been lucky in that since the company has started, we've really changed the space by having tech in trucks required, not phone calls, not the old school, not using faxes. Like, we forced the network to adopt to technology. So because of that, we're able to partner with a lot of these companies in the AI space and take the tech that they're developing, but bring the data to it much closer to the accident scene. And when I say closer, obviously, when there's an accident, there's usually 3 people that get involved: the consumer, police officer, and a tow truck that are coming to clean that up. And so much of this AI solution is rightfully focused on, what role can the consumer play? But in a situation where an accident has actually occurred, especially when a tow truck's needed to be brought there and potentially, EMS services and such, the customer is not in, nor should they be, the right position to do that. And I don't think anyone would argue that. And these are typically, obviously, very expensive claims, and they happen on a frequent enough basis that we should be thinking about that. So what we are doing is leveraging our network, our tech, and just the relationship that we have with our providers to provide that technology on the scene of an accident, because it is actually the case now that we can make total loss determination. We can change the destination directly there to go to the right place, whether it's a salvage yard, a collision facility, et cetera, and save thousands of dollars, both in time as well as it ending up in the wrong place and fighting, with storage companies, et cetera, by doing that right there. And the next step from that is obviously being able to close out a claim by doing the full estimate. And obviously, for someone with our background, that's really, something that's been the holy grail for so long. It's just exciting to see that being a reality today.
Now, I really want to dig in a little bit more into the AI. And I know that you're really passionate about it because you keep, hammering on the table and we can hear it in the mic. So no, that's brilliant. I love it. It's like, it's real passion. It's like, yes. And this is the service that we are providing our customers, or the policyholders of our customers, which is fantastic. So where is the AI kicks in terms of the decision making or recognizing the actions that need to be taken?
Yeah, good question. So it's current technology today through companies like Trackable and Claims Genius, and there's others out there as well, that they are very rapidly getting better and better at being able to ingest images from a damaged vehicle and be able to make that assessment. So it's not that we, are trying to develop that technology. There's no need to. There's so many companies that are accelerating that so quickly. What we are doing is basically bringing speed to the equation. So rather than waiting for that vehicle, like I said, to get lost for a while, to get stored in the wrong place, to get sent to a body shop when it shouldn't have been, because it was a borderline total loss or whatever, we are bringing that AI technology right to the scene and using it there to then have an automatic determination come back. Let's take that borderline case that would have otherwise gone to a collision facility, and have that changed to, this is an actual total loss vehicle, where we can send that on the right path, and save those days and all those other resources and rental cars and just, general customers waiting to find out what's going to happen, by employing that right there.
And, thank you for answering that, because I realized that I asked the same question twice, a little bit different, and received almost the same answer, which is thank you. And needless to say, this is the part that I'm going like, oh yeah, I need to edit this out. But this is great. Usually I interview founders and carriers and other folks in the industry, and I have a chief revenue officer. Now, your original role or the first role with HONK, what was it? Because you grew up to.
Yep, I was the VP of our network at HONK, so managing those 70,000 providers, and really looking for a way to bring a lot of the lessons learned from the claim space, a lot of the interactions that insurers have with direct or peer partners in the collision space into what we do for our partners, driving the right behaviors and results that incentivize the right providers and get rid of the ones you don't want in the system. And then from there, just as the company evolved, moved over into the Chief Revenue Officer role, which is where we're now.
So can you talk or share with the audience success stories of working with, not as a chief revenue, because people think about, okay, how much do we need to pay, right? But more about success stories with other partners and other insurance companies. And maybe if you have an anecdote, one or two.
Yeah, you got it. So honestly, I think that's one of the mistakes is assuming that in this role, when, 'cause this is a role that's pretty common, I think, now in startups, but isn't as much out there. And, the companies that insurance companies might run into as often is assuming that that's basically a sales role in the company. Because your example is exactly right. What you're really doing in this role is understanding the marketplace dynamics, things about what we just, discussed with AI or other things that are changing around you, and having discussions with strategic partners. So, some of the insurance companies that we talked about earlier, and understanding how together we can find ways that we can further adapt to and support those changes. And as a result, growing your company. So much of being in a revenue officer role, I think, is, working with your own executive team with all the competing priorities of a growing company, and making sure that they stay closely aligned with your strategic partners, and finding ways that we can be very quick to move so that we're able to capture and dominate the space while it's there. At the same time as just keeping the experience seamless, and, as a result, growing the revenue that you have with existing customers. Farmers is a great example. They've been a great partner of ours. You mentioned, long ago that you were part of the decision-making process there.
More than 5 years ago, so it's been a while. It's like ancient history, different lifetime ago.
I would say, the companies that we end up working with. So you mentioned Farmers, companies like Wawanesa, which is also obviously a very big company in California, that are really pushing the driving change around them as being an advantage for the company. As big as they are, they're very aggressive at looking for opportunities with tech to stay ahead, and think about roadside as a retention tool and how it can impact claims, and bringing that internally into your own company and saying, we do roadside claims here, but what else can we do to really impact the greater environment and the bigger agenda that they have, so we can continue to grow the relationship. It's pretty simple on paper, but I think it's one of the things that attracts a lot of the insure techs like Branch and Toco, and a lot of the companies that are coming our way is not the fact that we can change tires, right? But the fact that we can think about their business in a different way and set them up on a vertical path of taking advantage of this huge network out there that has technology available to them.
We covered most of the things that relate to insurance. Are you dealing with who is actually using HONK outside of insurance? Because me as a person, as a private person, can I use HONK, or are there other industries that are looking at HONK for a solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So HONK actually started as a consumer-facing company first. So if you're a consumer, you can go out there still and download the app, and you get essentially the same experience I'm referring to for an insurance company. But outside of that, the area, when we're talking about silver linings of COVID, the other industry that we interface with that has really exploded coming out of this is virtual car buying. So all the way to no brick and mortar at all. So companies like Carvana and Vroom and everyone in that space. The difficulty for them is they require moving these vehicles around to everywhere, and their main source, of logistics movement are these huge car haulers that don't belong in neighborhoods, frankly, and don't do a good job when they're shorter distances. So we've seen a great opportunity here to leverage again a lot of the learnings we've had from the insurance space, and the algo and the technology itself, to create a unique solution that's doing exactly that, filling the gap for, a very broad definition of last mile, the 50-mile range or so. And it's a really interesting thing because it's a space that wasn't really there pre-COVID, and now you can learn about those companies and look into them and just see the growth there. This is really the way people are purchasing vehicles now. So it's going back to your conversation about being a CRO, and frankly, anyone who's in InsurTech or a startup knows exactly that chase to constantly be pivoting to find your application in the current industry. And we've just gone through an enormous pivot as a nation and as a business. I think that's what everyone is or should be doing right now, is just looking at what needs to happen internally to stay relevant and continue growing.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So we are reaching the last question that I ask every interviewee or speaker. I'm not really sure how to define the amazing guest that I have on this show. Can you share with us a recommendation? It can be a book, a life hack, a TV show to binge, a movie, or just a hike to go to, especially, well, that will be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. So just to try to stay relevant, I think, in the last year, it's given all of us just this crazy ride. And at the beginning of the space, someone recommended a book to me that really, I think, was applicable and still is. It's a book called Relentless by Tim Grover. And to be honest with you, it's not for everyone. It's almost borderline offensive sometimes because he's so raw and so rich. He was the mental trainer and physical trainer for Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, and a lot of the greatest athletes. And the whole point of what he's really going through there is understanding in yourself, as well as others, what it takes to be unstoppable, like these people. And these high performance athletes, and to keep going when everyone else around you is giving up, and thriving under pressure, not letting your emotions really get in the way of making decisions and making you weak. And I think for all of us right now, especially, when you're in a position where you're running a company or running a team and heading into this unknown space that we're all in, learning to trust your instincts and not think it too much. He has this thing in there where he's just like, don't think, just get in the zone, learn how to control and adapt quickly. It's probably what I would say, I didn't expect it as much to have such an impact, but I've recommended it to my team, and I recommend it to, every leader I run into to, use, as well as just, how to recognize talent in your own team and how to keep that motivated through periods like this.
That really resonates with me. I will look into that book because we've seen, I recognize that I overthink so many things, and there is the point that, and I feel especially in martial arts, that we repeat a technique, it becomes our second nature, muscle memory, whatever you like to call it. And then, as you said, you're in the zone. You don't think, you just act.
That's right.
And it's perfect because you're so tuned into that thing. Love it. I will need to check that book out. Rochelle, thank you very, very much for your time in joining me on this InsurTech Talk conversation. Thank you.